It always seems when the world focuses on something really wrong, that something else pops up to misdirect people's attention. It's called diversion. Well, we may have a case of diversion right now, or we may have something that could turn into a disaster. Or worse, we don't know. That something is called Ebola. And what the world is not supposed to look at is what's been going on in Gaza. If you remember, Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 was blown out of the sky clearly now by the Kiev, Ukraine military. There's little doubt about it now. On the same day that the Israeli government, against the wishes of many Israelis, decided to annihilate the Gaza Strip and cleanse it once and for all. We do believe that that's the plan. Misdirection. MH17, tremendous amount of interest in that tragedy for obvious reasons. Ebola, huge interest for obvious reasons. We have 2 known Ebola cases here in Emory University's hospital in Atlanta. I guess the second one is en route now, the woman. These people, the doctor, 33-year-old Dr. Brantley, and the woman, I believe she's in her early 60s, were working in Africa as part of a philanthropical organization's charitable work. Let's just put it that way. We'll get into this more later. But they're both infected. They're both coming back here. Dr. Brantley is here. He was described in grave condition, and yet he was able to walk off the ambulance and walk right into the hospital without much difference between he and the other medical assistant that was with the doctor. Interesting observation. We also have many breaking news stories. They're all up at the top of rense.com in the center column. Please look, avail yourself of what we know. Both patients are said to be doing better now, both American patients. Meantime, a woman got off a plane at Gatwick Airport in London and apparently quite literally fell over dead after vomiting and exercising a lot of very unfavorable conditions on the airplane during the flight. They say she's negative. Do we believe that? I don't know. I don't trust most anyone except Henry Nyman anymore as far as telling the truth about disease and viral infection and contagion. At any rate, this is a very big story, as you well know. There's a lot of panic. I just got a story from someone, Scott Teeters, in fact, a host on the network here. Thank you, Scott. That a company that owns an Ebola drug has seen its stock skyrocket. What a shock. All right? So when these things happen, if you're on your feet, you can make some money, too. We don't know where this is going. It's the tip of the iceberg. Annually, every year, several 100,000 people die from normal influenza. We've had about 800, give or take, die of Ebola in Africa so far. We don't know where it's going. So far, it's, a scratch on the iceberg. But it has the potential to do some really ugly things. All right, Henry, that's enough of an intro for you. You're a master of virology. Henry Nyman, if you don't know, is the founder of Recombinomics.com, given credit by most intelligent people in the scientific community in the world as being one of the world's premier, if not the premier, true and honest virologist, and we're very honored to have Henry with us quite often on the program. Okay, my friend, let's tell him what it's all about.
Well, today definitely was the biggest news day, and there's quite a bit going on today, and there's actually quite a bit that we already know about the Ebola outbreak and where it began, how it evolved, where it stands today, and why it's causing as much concern as it is. And we actually already know quite a bit about the miracle treatment, actually, which is a cocktail of free mouse monoclonal antibodies directed against the envelope protein of the Ebola virus.
Which is it's a variant from the Zaire Ebola, isn't it? There's a little difference in this particular Ebola strain.
Yes and no. The basically the most deadly Ebola virus is from Zaire, and
Okay.
and that particular clade has caused the most deadliest outbreaks, as well as the largest number of outbreaks, and that is essentially what is currently in Western Africa. But the virus changes a little bit each time.
Mhm.
The Ebola is actually named for the Ebola River, which is in Zaire. At the time, I think it was the Belgian Congo. I don't know. It's the Democratic Republic of
Well,
Congo
they change
now.
names over there
Right.
pretty
It's,
often.
you know, of the two Congos, it's the big one. And in any event,
Okay.
the virus was named after the river, and the first outbreak was actually in 1976. And prior to this outbreak, that one produced the most number of deaths. And then 19 years later, in 1995, there was another big outbreak, also in Zaire, and that one produced the second highest number of fatalities. And then the current outbreak easily eclipsed both of them combined, and it is again the Zaire clade, but it's slightly different. So you can basically distinguish this one from the other two, but they're still very close to each other and very different than some of the other outbreaks that happened in Sudan or Uganda. Those were very distinct, different clades. So the one that's been the deadliest and the one that produces the highest case fatality rate, and the one that's produced the most number of outbreaks are all the Zaire clade, and that's what's causing all the problems right now.
All right.
And part of the reason there's as much concern as there is because, like I said, the number of dead is I guess it's about 900 now, and those two big outbreaks that I told you about that had the record, together they did about 600, so it's already 1.5 times.
You got a 75% mortality rate, about, too. Right?
Yeah, but the number it bounces around. It's around 50 to 60% right now.
Okay.
The first one in 76 was actually 88%. And the second one, I think, was in the 70s or so. This one's more in the 50 to 60s. But that's a little bit off because there's still a lot of patients that are in the hospital. So the two numbers I mentioned before, that was on known outcomes. That was basically the patient either got discharged from the hospital or died. And a lot of the cases in the current outbreak are in the hospital, and so the case fatality rate you see that pops up is actually a little lower than it really is, because many of the people in the hospital are going to die.
Well, they're not resolved, so they're still lingering.
Right. And so the rate that you're seeing now, which is, I think the latest was 57% or something, that assumes that everybody in the hospital survives. And that's certainly not going to happen. So it's probably closer to 60 to 70%, and similar to the 1995 outbreak. And actually, these monoclonal antibodies were generated against the virus from the 1995 outbreak. But basically, the timing of this is pretty straightforward. There was a paper that came out in the New England Journal of Medicine on April 16th, and that pretty much described the initial cases, which at that time, most of the information they had, or at least most of the samples they collected, were from Guinea. And Guinea was really the start. And most people don't realize this, but the initial case was actually in December of 2013, and it was a 2-year-old child, and who got symptomatic on December 2nd and died on December 6th. And then many family members, his sister, his mother, his grandmother, the nurse, the village midwife, all ended up dying in that village, which was Gukadu, which was really in the southern part of Guinea. And then the numbers started to go up, and it was really a healthcare worker that seemed to really spread it to 3 other locations that were also in Guinea. And all of these locations were just across the border from both Sierra Leone as well as Liberia. So this outbreak was a little bit unusual from the other ones, which only involved one country, in that the epicenter was really kind of at the juncture of 3 different countries. And so it offered the opportunity where you really could get people infected in 3 different countries, and then all 3 countries had their capitals on the western coast, quite a ways away from where these cases were.
Right.
So for those that wanted to go to the larger hospitals that were in the capital cities, and that presented the opportunity for it to go from a relatively rural, isolated area into large population centers in 3 different countries, kind of almost simultaneously. So the paper went through some detail. It had collected samples from 15 of the cases, and by the time they started collecting the samples, those early cases had died, and they were really focusing on cases in mid-March. And they took samples from, I think there were 16 cases. They got samples from 15, I think. 14 out of the 16 died. So it had a very high case fatality rate. They collected samples from, they were able to isolate the virus from 3 of the patients, including the 2 survivors, as well as a fatal case. And they were all in mid-March. And they were 2 distinct areas. They were, but in spite of that, they were all essentially the same. So they were all this same subclade, indicating there was a single introduction, and these would have all traced back to this 2-year-old child from December. So the numbers started low and slowly built up, and then a healthcare worker, infected patients where she was working, and then she went into another hospital, and then she had contact with another family. And so it kind of spread to like 4 different villages as a result of that one person. And then it started to, make the news more, because you really had multiple locations in Guinea, but then you had cases in Liberia as well as Sierra Leone. So that is probably one of the main reasons that things got so large as far as the number of cases are concerned, is that you really had 3 different outbreaks, if you will, going at the same time. They all were very close to each other geographically, but they were actually in 3 different countries. And so you started with those 3 sequences that came out that showed that they were all very similar. And then recently, just in the last couple of weeks, 14 more sequences came out of Sierra Leone, and these were done by a group at Harvard and MIT, and they released those sequences a couple of weeks ago. And a comparison of those sequences to each other, they were actually all collected on June 1st. And all 14 of these sequences were virtually identical to each other, and they had shown a little bit of evolutionary drift away from the ones that were collected in March.